Millions watched as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaned into her microphone, her voice low and lethal. They thought they could reduce her to an angry headline, a disposable woman with too much conviction. But when the recording played, when the world heard him threaten to destroy her, the chamber did erupt. It froze, because at that moment everyone understood this wasn't politics anymore, it was survival. Stay with us, because what happened next didn't just rewrite one career. It redrew the line between power and consequence forever. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe now so you never miss the truth. The broadcast had already broken records by the time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat down. 5 million people were watching live, not because budget hearings usually drew audiences in the millions, but because the past 72 hours had been a rolling inferno. Someone had leaked internal documents showing billions siphoned from Puerto Rico's recovery fund into defense contracts. Every major network branded it the scandal that could topple leadership. The overhead lights were blinding, hot enough to sting. She forced herself not to shift in her seat. If she looked away now, they'd say she flinched. Mike Johnson waited across from her, fingers steepled. He looked almost bored, but she could see the small flicker in his jaw muscle. He knew she had more than headlines. "Mr. Speaker," she said, her voice measured, almost calm, "on March 8th, your office signed a reallocation order moving $4 billion meant for disaster relief to your preferred contractors. Those communities still don't have electricity. Children are rationing insulin. Do you deny your signature?" Johnson smiled slowly, as if he'd been rehearsing that expression in the mirror. "Congresswoman, your socialist telenovela is wasting this committee's time." Somewhere behind the cameras, a producer sucked in a breath. AOC felt her heartbeat tick up in her throat. "This isn't theater," she answered. "This is survival for millions of American citizens." Johnson let out a quiet laugh, unhurried, deliberate. "Save the theatrics," he murmured, his voice low but caught perfectly by every microphone. "You're just a brand of lipstick." The phrase hit her harder than she wanted to admit. A part of her wanted to stand up, to walk out from under the heat of the lights and let someone else fight this battle. But she knew it was too late to turn back. She thought of her mother, standing under the leaking roof in the Bronx, telling her in Spanish that no one would ever hand her respect. She'd have to carve it out herself. AOC kept her hands steady as she reached forward and rested her palm over the red folder. Her thumb grazed the edge of the small black USB drive tucked underneath. But this time, she didn't feel the surge of confidence she'd rehearsed. She felt something colder, the knowledge that she might already be too exposed. Because the USB wasn't the evidence itself. It was only a decryption key. The real files, scans of Johnson's signature, internal memos, the sealed minutes of the closed-door vote, were locked on a secure server. If she disappeared or was silenced, the password would be triggered, and every document would go public within an hour. She wondered if he knew that yet. A vibration under the table made her jump. For half a second, she thought her own heart had made the table tremble. She slid her phone just far enough to see the screen. A message. Unknown sender. She hesitated, breath caught behind her teeth, then tapped it open. It was a photograph, her mother's house in the Bronx. The front door, the rusted mailbox, the sagging gutter she'd helped repair last year. Underneath, a single line of text, "Stay quiet." Her mouth tasted of copper. For the first time that morning, her hand wavered. A dozen cameras caught the smallest quiver in her fingers. Johnson didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on her face, studying her reaction like a scientist watching a lab rat choose between escape and endurance. Somewhere in the back of the chamber, a journalist whispered, "Jesus." AOC forced herself to look up. She couldn't give him the moment of triumph he was waiting for. Beneath the table, her phone vibrated again, insistent, a tiny electric pulse that felt like the countdown to something she couldn't yet name. She thought of the $4 billion, how it wasn't just a number. It was a dialysis machine. Roofs, the generator that kept a NICU from going dark in San Juan. She remembered a woman with tear tracks on her cheeks telling her, "If they take this funding, we will die." She swallowed, raised her chin, and wondered, just for a breath, how many people in this room were waiting to watch her fail. The email was written in the sterile language of political warfare. Subject, AOC Containment Strategy. Luis Herrera read it twice, though the words didn't change. He'd been Johnson's communications director for 4 years. He knew the difference between aggressive messaging and something darker. The memo was darker. Amplify her as unstable, radical, and unserious. Leak rumors about mental health treatment. He'd forwarded it to his private account before he quit. The next day, he walked out of the Capitol with nothing but a single box and a feeling he couldn't name. That was 3 months ago. Since then, no one could reach him. His voicemail was full. His social media disappeared overnight. The last text he sent was to a reporter at Politico. "If anything happens to me, remember that email." In Johnson's office, the strategy moved ahead without him. Screens glowed with mock-up ads. AOC's face in black and white, the words "too emotional for Congress" stamped across her forehead. A line of text at the bottom read, "Paid for by Americans for accountability," though no one in the room bothered to ask where the money came from. By the end of the week, the buy was complete. $2 million in Facebook ads blanketed every swing district in the country. "AOC secretly treated for mental illness," the headlines screamed. Staff say she was too unstable to lead. Some posts were even uglier, spliced with footage of her raising her voice in committee hearings, the captions cut to look like outbursts. That night, Alexandria sat alone in her kitchen, her laptop balanced on her knees. She replayed the clip again. Johnson's face split in that smug smile, his voice dripping with something that wasn't just disdain, it was calculation. "You're just a brand of lipstick," she clicked pause. The frame froze on the moment his eyes had flicked to her hand resting on the folder. He'd noticed the USB, she realized. Maybe he didn't know what it held, but he knew it mattered. Her phone buzzed. A notification slid across the screen. "AOC unhinged. Inside sources reveal emotional breakdowns." She shut her eyes, pressed her thumb to the bridge of her nose. A part of her wanted to throw the laptop against the wall. Another part, the part that had kept her standing on debate stages when donors tried to drown her out, knew that was exactly the reaction they were trying to provoke. Her thoughts drifted to Lewis. The way he'd looked the last time she saw him, pale, restless, eyes darting to every corner as if expecting to be overheard. He had tried to warn her. She hadn't understood how serious it was. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for her to do something. She opened her secure drive. There it was, the document he'd forwarded before he disappeared. Amplify her as unstable. Leak rumors about mental health treatment. She read it again, her chest tightening. She thought about every woman who'd ever been called hysterical when she raised her voice. Every immigrant told she was unfit because she cared too much. A flicker of something between rage and dread sparked under her ribs. She clicked back to the video file, about to replay the hearing. And then the screen went black. She tapped the trackpad. Nothing. A heartbeat later, a line of red text appeared across the center of the display. "Stop. We see everything." Her stomach dropped so fast she thought she might be sick. The cursor didn't move. The keyboard was dead. For the first time since the hearing, she felt real fear. Not just for herself, but for the people who'd trusted her to fight. Her gaze slid to the corner of the screen, to the small green camera light still glowing, even though the laptop was frozen. Someone was watching. She forced herself to breathe. One steady inhale, one exhale. A memory flashed unbidden, her mother wiping down counters after the lunch rush, saying softly in Spanish that courage was not the absence of fear, but doing the right thing while your hands still shook. Her hands were shaking now. She reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then moved to the contact she never saved under a real name. The one person who might still know how deep this went. She pressed call. The line rang once, twice. She swallowed, feeling the pulse in her throat. In the silence between rings, she wondered if she was already too late. The headlines came faster than she could read them. Is AOC losing her fire? Where is her response? Has she finally been silenced? They wanted her rage. They needed her voice loud enough to fill their segments and sell their ad slots. Silence was the one thing they didn't know how to monetize, so she gave it to them. All day she ignored the calls, the emails, the reporters waiting on the sidewalk. She let her staff issue bland statements about focus and due diligence. The truth was simpler. She was gathering ammunition. By nightfall, her apartment felt smaller than ever. The walls seemed to lean in with every notification pinging her phone. She lowered the blinds, then sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the laptop balanced on her knees. The cursor blinked over the folder she had labeled in plain text, proof. She clicked play on the raw footage again. Johnson's voice crackled through her headphones, that same lazy contempt. Save the theatrics. You're just a brand in lipstick. Her jaw tightened. She rewound the video, playing the 30 seconds when he glanced down at her hand on the folder. She slowed the speed, studying his eyes, the quick dart to the USB peeking from under the papers. In the space between frames, she thought about every time a man had decided she was easier to mock than to answer. Her phone buzzed. Another alert. She didn't look. Instead, she forced herself to replay it again. The words didn't change, but her reaction did. Each repetition scraped away the shock until only clarity remained. He hadn't been improvising. He'd been executing a plan. The cursor flickered. A small window pulsed on the edge of the screen. One new message. She exhaled slowly before clicking it open. You think this is about politics? This is about survival. No sender, no timestamp. Her mouth went dry. She reached for the glass of water beside her but couldn't lift it without her hand trembling. She set it down untouched. For a moment she closed her eyes. Darkness pressed against her lids, and she felt herself slip backward in time. She was 10 again, standing in the kitchen of the diner where her mother worked. The owner, a thick-necked man with a gold chain and a voice that carried through the walls, was leaning over her mother, jabbing a finger into her chest. "Just a hysterical woman from the island," he barked. "You people are all the same." Her mother's hands shook as she wiped them on her apron, but she didn't look up. Young Alexandria stood there, her own fists balled tight, heart hammering so loudly she thought it might break her ribs. Someday, she whispered to her mother when he finally walked away, "I'll never let them speak to me like that." When she opened her eyes, she was back in her living room, the glow of the laptop sharp against her skin. The fear hadn't vanished, but something heavier settled on top of it. A cold, precise resolve. She clicked into the secured drive. The file directory opened, each line of text like a loaded chamber. Puerto Rico reallocation master, docx signed, PDF. She dragged the file to her desktop, her pulse steadying as the progress bar filled. At the bottom of the folder, a second file waited. Redacted call audio, MP3. Her thumb hovered over the trackpad. She pressed play, for a moment only static. Then Johnson's voice, lower now, stripped of all pretense. "If she doesn't shut up, we'll destroy her on Fox." Her breath left her in a single, controlled exhale. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away, but somewhere beneath the steadiness she wore like armor, a thought slid cold through her mind. How many people in this city were waiting for her to fail? The courthouse doors swung open at precisely 9. 2 a.m. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped into the marble atrium without pausing. Cameras flashed in a staccato assault. She didn't look up. The black blazer she wore was unadorned except for a small pin over her heart, a silver badge that had belonged to her mother. The hallway smelled of coffee and floor polish, but under it all was something sharper, the anticipation of spectacle. Every reporter knew the stakes. No freshman congresswoman had ever filed a defamation suit against a sitting speaker this large, this personal. She passed a line of photographers pressed against the ropes. One shouted her name, hoping for a soundbite. She kept her eyes fixed ahead. They could have her image, but not her voice, at least not yet. Inside the courtroom, her legal team sat in a tight formation. The lead attorney rose as she entered, his face set in an expression halfway between reverence and dread. On the table in front of them, the complaint lay stacked in a red folder. Defamation with malicious intent. Her name printed in bold on the first page, underlined twice as if to remind her there was no stepping back. She sat, exhaled slowly, and reached for the binder. The judge glanced over her glasses. "Counsel, please state the damages being sought." Her attorney's voice was calm, each word hitting the air like a hammer. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has suffered documented material harm, including the cancellation of a publishing contract valued at $8 million. A rustle swept through the press gallery, and the withdrawal of a $5 million speaking engagement. A reporter's pen snapped under his grip. Finally, the loss of $20 million in pledged campaign contributions as a direct consequence of defamatory statements. Johnson didn't blink. He looked down at his own folded hands, the picture of unbothered confidence. But a vein in his temple pulsed each time the dollar amounts were spoken aloud. AOC rested her palm over the badge on her chest. She remembered her mother telling her, "Dignity is the last thing you let them steal." The judge nodded once. "The court recognizes the damages claimed." Her attorney set the file down. For a moment there was no movement, no coughs, no shuffling paper. Only the quiet knowledge that everyone in the room was witnessing something historic. The bailiff called for a recess. Chairs scraped back. AOC didn't move. She could feel Johnson's eyes on her, searching for any crack in her composure. She gave him nothing. A voice murmured just behind her shoulder. She turned to see his counsel, a man she'd watched for years on C-SPAN, always smiling behind some polished denial. Today, he didn't bother smiling. He leaned in, his words pitched so low she almost didn't catch them. If you drop this lawsuit, we'll restore the Puerto Rico funding, no questions asked. Her heartbeat didn't quicken, it slowed. She thought of every roof still covered in tarps, every generator that would die without diesel. She thought of the families who had sent her letters begging her not to forget them. And for one terrible second, she considered it. Then she looked him dead in the eye. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up her phone from the table. Her thumb tapped the screen. A quiet beep. The lawyer's face changed, understanding too late that she'd recorded every syllable. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. When he stepped back, his expression was ashen. Outside the tall windows, the city kept moving as if nothing monumental was happening. But inside, the air felt different, thicker, weighted by the knowledge that the line had been crossed. She gathered her papers, each movement precise, a small defiance against the chaos they were trying to conjure around her. When she finally stood, she felt something slide into place inside her chest, a certainty that this was no longer just her fight. The bailiff opened the side door. She walked past the rows of cameras without acknowledging them. At the courthouse steps, her phone buzzed again. She ignored it until she was halfway to the curb. A notification lit the screen. Security alert. She turned, scanning the street. A black SUV with no plates idled across from her building entrance. Its windows were tinted too dark to see inside. The engine rumbled. She didn't look away. She only wondered, as she slipped the phone back into her pocket, how far they would go to silence her. The courtroom was full before sunrise. Reporters lined the pews, notebooks balanced on their knees, eyes fixed on the defense table as though waiting for it to crack open and reveal something monstrous. Alexandria sat with her hands folded on the table, her shoulders squared under the same black blazer. The badge over her heart caught the morning light each time she breathed. The judge's gavel came down, a single sharp report that flattened every whisper. "Counsel," she said evenly, "you may proceed with your evidence." Her lead attorney stood. His voice didn't rise or tremble. "Your Honor, we submit audio documentation demonstrating clear intent to defame and intimidate the plaintiff." He clicked a small black device. The speakers hissed once. Johnson's voice filled the chamber, unmistakable in its lazy scorn. "If that little girl doesn't shut up, we'll destroy her on Fox." No one moved. The words hung in the air, acidic and heavy. AOC stared straight ahead, her expression carved from something older than anger. On the defense bench, Johnson's mouth opened as if to protest, but nothing came out. For a fraction of a second, he looked smaller, a man who realized too late that the room no longer belonged to him. Her attorney let the recording finish. Silence flooded back, almost violent in its pressure. Then Johnson's counsel jolted to his feet. His chair slammed back into the table behind him. "Objection," he barked. "This material represents a breach of classified deliberations, national security implications." The judge lifted one brow. Her pen hovered above her notepad, then slowly came to rest. "National security," she repeated. The lawyer's eyes flicked to the cameras, then back to the bench. "Your Honor, if the court allows this evidence, it risks exposing privileged discussions with federal oversight bodies. We request immediate suppression and a closed review." In the gallery, reporters exchanged glances. Pens scraped paper. One voice whispered under the balcony, just loud enough to carry. "Did Johnson just admit criminal intimidation?" The judge tapped her gavel twice. "Counsel, you will present a written motion specifying exactly which content you claim is classified," she said coldly. "Until then, this proceeding is adjourned for evidentiary review." The bailiff's voice boomed across the hush. "All rise." Everyone stood. The judge disappeared through the side door, her robe trailing the last word behind her. Adjourned. AOC remained in place as the room erupted in a low roar, reporters flipping through notes, cameramen refocusing lenses. Her attorney leaned in, voice pitched low. "He overplayed. They weren't ready for you to have the recording." She didn't answer. She was watching Johnson, who sat motionless, his hands clenched together so tight the skin had gone bloodless. He didn't meet her gaze. He knew the truth had slipped beyond his reach. She closed her laptop with a single, precise movement. Every muscle in her back felt like it was locked in place. Behind her, someone muttered to a colleague, "This is going to split the house down the middle." She rose. The badge over her heart glinted one more time before she stepped away. Outside the chamber doors, the hallway was already choked with microphones. The crush of bodies, the press of questions, none of it touched her. She walked past them as if they weren't there. At the end of the corridor, a CNN camera turned toward her. The red light blinked on. She stopped. Her reflection stared back from the lens, pale, exhausted, but unbroken. The memory of her mother's voice came to her again, quiet but firm. Never let them make you small. She squared her shoulders. I am not afraid, she said. The microphones caught every word. 3 days of argument had burned through the courthouse like a fever no one could break. Johnson's attorneys clung to the same refrain over and over. Protected speech, they insisted. Robust debate, political disagreement. But every time they said it, their voices grew thinner, like they could hear how empty the words had become. The prosecution never raised their volume. They didn't need to. They laid out the evidence one piece at a time, each fact heavier than the last. The recording where Johnson threatened to destroy her on Fox. The email outlining the plan to brand her unstable. The photograph of her mother's house sent as a warning. The secret offer to trade hurricane relief money for her silence. In the gallery, reporters stopped scribbling and simply watched. No one pretended this was business as usual anymore. On the final day, the lead prosecutor stepped forward. His voice was steady, almost quiet. This is not protected speech, he said. This is the calculated defamation of a public servant to poison her reputation, endanger her family, and force her compliance. That is not debate, that is extortion. A murmur spread through the benches. Even some of Johnson's aides lowered their eyes. AOC sat motionless. Her hands rested over her chest, the silver badge cold against her palm. She felt the texture of the metal under her fingertips, grounding her in the swirl of voices and cameras. In her mind, she was 10 again, standing in the kitchen of that restaurant. Her mother's face turned away so the owner wouldn't see her tears. The words he'd spat still burned under her skin. Just a hysterical woman from the island. And her own whisper, too soft for him to hear, someday I'll never let them speak to me like that. The memory didn't make her smaller. It made her taller. The judge's gavel struck once and the room snapped to silence. She looked up. The woman behind the bench studied them all, her expression carved from something older than politics. This court has weighed the evidence, the judge said. We have considered the defense's argument regarding protected speech and found it insufficient. Johnson didn't breathe. The judge continued, voice unwavering. We find the defendant liable for defamation of a severe and malicious nature. A hush fell so profound it felt like the air had been sucked from the walls. Damages awarded to the plaintiff, the judge said, in the amount of $100 million. For an instant, nothing moved. No pens scratched, no cameras clicked. Even the bailiff seemed to forget to breathe. Then a single exhale somewhere in the back row broke the spell. A low murmur swelled into a roar as the reporters realized they were witnessing the largest personal defamation judgment ever leveled against a sitting speaker. Johnson sagged in his chair. His attorney stared at the floor, lips moving in a silent calculation of what it would cost to appeal. AOC didn't stand. She didn't raise her fists or smile for the cameras. She only closed her eyes. The badge under her palm felt warm now, as if the memory inside it had survived this trial right alongside her. Her lips parted in a whisper only she could hear. I told you, Mama. Outside the courthouse, the air felt suspended as if the city itself was holding its breath. No one shouted questions. No one pushed forward for a better angle. Even the reporters stood silent, pens frozen halfway to paper. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped past the cameras without pausing. The courthouse steps rose around her in clean white tiers, and at the center, a smooth marble railing caught the cold morning light. She reached into the pocket of her blazer and drew out a photograph. Her mother's face looked back at her from the faded print. Hair pulled into a simple twist, a dish towel over one shoulder, the soft defiance in her eyes, the same defiance AOC had carried into this fight. She set the photo on the railing, pressing it flat with her palm. The hush grew deeper. For a moment, she let herself remember the night her mother told her dignity was never something you asked for. You claimed it, even when your hands shook. She turned to face the crowd. 1,000 faces stared back, some expectant, some awed, a few brimming with relief so raw it looked almost like grief. Her voice didn't waver when she spoke. They said I was emotional, she began, her gaze sweeping across the cameras. They were right. A flicker of movement near the press line, Johnson's staff shifting uncomfortably, their eyes flicking to the ground. Because I will never be cold enough to sell out the people who trusted me. Somewhere in the throng, a reporter pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. AOC let the silence expand around her. She wanted every person watching to feel its weight, the cost of telling the truth in a room built to punish it. Behind the rows of cameras, Johnson stood motionless. His skin looked gray in the early light. The confident smirk he'd worn in every headline was gone, replaced by something hollow. A cameraman adjusted focus. The lens zoomed until the entire frame was Johnson's face, washed out and defeated. AOC didn't look away. "You called me hysterical," she said, her tone even almost soft. "Yet in the end, it was your voice that cracked." No one clapped, not yet. The moment was too sharp to touch. She took a breath and lifted her chin. "I will be donating $5 million from this settlement to establish a legal defense fund," she continued. "For every woman who has been slandered, threatened, or humiliated for daring to stand her ground." A low exhale shivered through the crowd. Relief, vindication, awe. She rested her fingertips on her mother's photograph one last time. Then she stepped back, letting her hand fall to her side. For the first time all morning, a sound broke through the stillness. Applause, tentative at first, then swelling until it rolled across the steps in a wave that felt almost physical. Somewhere behind her, a woman's voice rose clear and unsteady. "We see you." AOC didn't smile. She simply nodded as if acknowledging something too big for words. Then she turned. Each step down the marble was deliberate, unhurried. The applause built behind her, layer by layer, until it was no longer just approval. It was a promise that no one could ever again dismiss her as hysterical without remembering how this ended. As she reached the last step, the cameras kept rolling, but she didn't glance back. The screen went black. White letters appeared, stark and final against the darkness. "Power can wound, truth can heal."